Hello, my name is Rachel Klamala, Chief of Staff at Nemertes Research. Welcome to our monthly webinar entitled Still the WAN, Nemertes MPLS Rates and Service Benchmark by John Burke. This webinar consists of an interactive presentation and moderated Q&A period. To submit a question, please use the control panel on GoToWebinar. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please contact webinars@nemertes.com. Upon conclusion, you will be presented with a short survey. Please answer the questions to provide feedback on this webinar and content for future webinars. We also ask if you'd like to participate in our research. In exchange for your participation, you will receive access to our research. A replay will soon be available for viewing on our website. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over now to John Burke.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Always a pleasure to have a chance to talk to folks, and this week especially fun to talk about our MPLS provider benchmark, where we surveyed and interviewed to get people's information about their MPLS services and their MPLS service providers. So we'll start by introducing Nemertes, who we are and what we do, for those of you who are not familiar with us. And then we will talk a little bit about the study and the participants in the study. We'll then start to read out the results, beginning with some information about the space, about the world of MPLS relationships currently, and we'll talk about rates people are paying for MPLS and for access links to get their MPLS, and we'll wrap it up with some information on vendor ratings, how people feel about the vendors that they're working with. We'll close with some recommendations. We'll talk about the upcoming webinar in March, and take it out with a question and answer session at the end. And with that, let's move ahead. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, Nemertes Research is a research and strategic consulting firm, and we're focused on analyzing the business impact that companies realize when they deploy emerging technologies. So we're focused on a broad array of newer technologies in cloud, in unified communications and collaboration, in customer experience and digital transformation generally, and in security. Our main mode of research is to benchmark enterprise IT. So that's the analysts, folks like me, getting on the phone and having structured but still fairly free-form conversations with IT leaders about what they're deploying, how they're deploying it, the roadblocks or pitfalls that they run into and how they work around them, and the value that their companies are deriving from deploying these technologies. We supplement those interviews with survey information, and as you'll see, this current webinar is focused on a combination of benchmarked and survey-based data. Based on the information that we collect, we provide a broad range of advisory services and strategic consulting. In this case, we could do customized rates, comparisons, and evaluations for folks based on the information that we've collected. So about the study. As I noted a moment ago, it is a combination of interview data, client project data, and data that we collected through surveying. Our focus was on large and very large companies initially, but not exclusively for that size of companies. And the companies are large and very large, mostly in terms of revenue and number of employees, not necessarily in terms of the size of their networks. And as you'll see, the demographics are fairly broad. This research was conducted in the second half of 2016 and will be refreshed sometime in Q2 or Q3 of 2017. So as I noted, the participants represent a fairly broad swath of the enterprise, with manufacturing, financial services, and professional services companies accounting for about half of participants, and healthcare and retail representing the next largest slices. In the other category, we've got everything from media companies to transportation and distribution firms. By title, we were dealing mainly with folks in the manager or director level on up to C-level participants, and in infrastructure, in IT generally, and in telecoms as job categories. In the other category, we had a few engineers and consultants into the mix as well. As I noted, by size, we're definitely leaning towards the large and the very large companies here, with only about 15% of participants meeting the description of small or mid-size when we look at revenues. That is, folks who are pulling in less than $1 billion in revenues. Half the participants in the survey were large companies by revenue, making between $1 billion and $10 billion a year, and the remainder very large, with more than $10 billion a year in revenues. Looking at number of employees, again, leaning towards the large and the very large, large being companies from 2,500 to 10,000 employees, and very large, more than 10,000 employees. The remainder were mid-sized companies. So we were really focused on companies with more than a couple of hundred employees. And lastly, by culture, and this is something that is fairly unique to Nemertes research, we're always very interested in how companies approach technology generally. And we divide this culture, the company's culture around IT, not the IT departments, but the company's culture around IT into 4 categories: conservative, moderate, aggressive, and leading edge, where the conservative folks typically only deploy technologies that are extremely mature and possibly even on the downslope of adoption and starting to be replaced by other things already, that they deploy typically also only in order to reduce costs or because their previous service or technology in that space has fallen completely off the map and they can no longer support it. A situation, for instance, we often see with legacy telecom systems, legacy telephony. Folks are holding on to them in some cases until there's no secondary market, there's no tertiary market, and they have no hope of spares or skilled staff anymore, so they're finally making a change in their infrastructure. So that's kind of a conservative profile. Moderates lean that way but make exceptions on a case-by-case basis, but still look at IT generally as a cost center rather than some kind of strategic investment. Aggressive folks flip that calculation and look at IT generally as strategic, take a conservative stance in some cases. Leading edge and bleeding edge companies tend to look at IT as not just strategic, but as a source of sustained competitive advantage, and so they try and get there, a year or more in advance of their peers and competitors. So with that said about the participant pool, let's talk about results. First off, the picture participants by provider breaks down about the way you'd expect it. More than half the market with either AT&T or Verizon as their MPLS provider. The remainder spread across second-tier players like CenturyLink, Level 3 Cogent, or other, which in this case includes, among others, Bell Canada, Comcast, Windstream, XO, and others. And turn-up times. This is a subject that we've been hearing a lot about from participants in our benchmarks for many years now. A perennial complaint has been that it takes way too long to get a new MPLS link provisioned. And people complain to us about it taking 60, 90, 120 days to get something deployed. And so we were a little surprised by how positive the results were on this question overall, in that for most of the people involved, most of the time, 60% of these people, most of the time, they're getting their connections in a month or less than a month. However, and it's really important to note this, more than a quarter are waiting 60 days or more, and about 10%, almost 10%, are waiting more than 3 months. So we're getting into that 90 days plus territory. So that's not a huge piece of the market, but it's certainly significant. And if you take into account the 60 days plus slice, as I say, it becomes more than 25% of the market. And what's interesting is that the participants in the research did not necessarily attribute this to technological problems or logistical problems in the sense of needing to actually dig a trench or pull a cable, a lot of it got laid at the feet of process. As the CIO at one of the companies noted, it can take some time before they can provide a commitment on dates for circuit delivery because their procurement process is still from the 1970s. A little snark there, but pointing the finger more at process than at technology or the physical environment. We were able to do a breakdown by vendor for at least AT&T and Verizon on this point, and we see a slightly different array of values there. AT&T is looking pretty good in this case in that their participants using them got no further than the 2 to 3 months zone, so they didn't get anybody in the 90-day plus region. And more than half of their participants using them said that they were getting their connections typically in 3 weeks or less, with a solid chunk getting it within a week, which is pretty impressive. Looking at Verizon, we see a somewhat different set of pie slices, if you will, with a substantial chunk in the 20% range in that 3 months plus range, so 90 days or more, but still a solid 34% getting what they're looking for in less than 3 weeks, and more than half getting what they're looking for in under a month. So still very solid performance there. And it's worth noting that in both cases, restricting the really slow deployments to fairly small slices of the pie overall. So getting those turn-up times is great, but getting a good idea of when that turn-up is going to take place is almost as important. For planning purposes, it really helps to know if I'm going to be waiting 120 days or if I'm going to be waiting 40 days or 20 days or 10. And so we ask people not just, how long did it actually take to get things, but also how consistent was the provider in telling you that you were going to get it and then delivering it when they said they were going to deliver it to you. So that consistency aspect of turn-up. And we got some very promising results here as well. Again, somewhat to our surprise, given how people have been talking about this in research that we've conducted over the last several years. And I should say that that disgruntlement over how long it takes to get connections and the inconsistency of vendors' ability to predict when a connection was going to be delivered has been providing some of the strong impetus towards deploying SD-WAN technologies. The idea being that if you can get into internet-based connectivity where you can get a turn-up even faster, you can decrease the provisioning time for your new branches or branches that you're moving or changing the connectivity for, and that will, excuse me, that will provide the organization overall with a greater level of agility. So seeing not only that folks are delivering faster than perhaps that thinking allows for, but that they're actually getting pretty good consistency in delivery, that vendors are not only able to tell them when they're going to deliver, but they're able to tell them accurately when they're going to deliver, has been very interesting to find out. And in fact, more than 60% of the time, almost 70% of the time, providers are giving them a date that's either just right, exact, or is within a week, so that they're not, telling them one thing and then delivering 6 weeks later. They're telling them when they're going to get it, and most of the time hitting the mark with that. And what we've seen is that where there is variation, as this finance director at a large hospitality company pointed out, it's site-specific. It tends to vary according to the infrastructure in place, and often leaning in that direction of over-promising and under-delivering, unfortunately. In the okay camp, and nearly a third of folks were in the okay camp, where they felt that the providers sometimes met their deadlines, but not most of the time. I think the telecommunications VP summed it up very well with a meh. People were unhappy about it, but were not up in arms. We did not get long screeds or rants or any kind of real heaping of abuse on providers. We just got more of this meh attitude, like what can we expect? It's clear, though, that they can expect more and should expect more, given how well the other 68% are doing. Oh, my screen just went dark, and I bet yours did too, but we're back, and I hope we're back for you guys as well. Sorry about that. Not sure exactly why that happened. Okay, consistency by vendor. This has been another case of things looking roughly similar until we start digging in by vendor, and then seeing that in this case Verizon is doing pretty well, excellence or pretty goods for more than half of their customers, 55%, but about 45% falling into that okay range of feeling like the vendor's only sometimes hitting its deadlines and certainly not getting within a week of being correct. AT&T looks slightly better. They've got more like 75% in the week, dates correct within a week or better categories, and only about 25% in that sometimes space. Certainly we can try digging in if you want to come to us for one of the custom rates comparisons we can do. We can try and dig in on your vendor, if it's Verizon, AT&T, or anyone else. If we've got the data, we'll dig in and see how your peers are doing compared to you. So another aspect of the MPLS market that we wanted to look at was contract age. How old are the contracts that are out there? And a 3-year contract is pretty typical, so no surprise we were seeing the bulk of users with contracts that were 3 years old or less. But there were definitely a solid contingent who had contracts from 2013, 2012, even earlier. And the 2013, of course, were the ones that were passing the 3-year mark during 2016, second half of which was when we did the research. And so that suggests that folks are not breaking their contracts early, and a substantial number of them are holding on to their providers across those 3-year margins. They're sticking with providers and renewing. And I think the general experience has been, as the VP at the pharmaceutical company said, that their providers have met most of their customer requirements, and they're continually improving their performance and have begun to be more proactive. They're starting to partner with us to be able to provide enhanced services in the past 2 years. So we got a sense that this was not an isolated case, that providers kind of across the spectrum were starting to step up and become more involved in improving services in collaboration with their customers, at least their large ones, and that was having an effect, a beneficial one, on keeping contracts in a renewal phase. Breaking it down by vendor, we see a little variation again between the two largest slices of the market, the AT&T and Verizon pieces. We see that the bulk of the Verizon contracts represented in our participant pool started in 2013 or 2014. Only about a third had been renewed in 2015 or 2016. We see that older slice of the pie is smaller for AT&T, that half of their contracts were spun up in 2015 or 2016, and only half were 2014 or older, suggesting that they are starting to get a slightly wider footprint in the space as they expand the number of contracts that they're getting that are less than 3 years old, and as contracts continue to be typically 3 years in length. So let's talk a little bit about pricing. We're not going to obviously go through the whole price table across the range of speeds that we have, which range from T1 type speeds, which are still fairly popular out there, up through 10 gig. But we'll take a look at some representative slices. and look at some popular speeds and see what we can see. One of the most important things that we saw, I mean, no surprise, prices drop over time for links of a given capacity typically, although they can start to tail up again as a particular speed gets really old and vendors want to try and cycle them out of the pool in favor of the higher bandwidth links. So we sometimes see, you know, like a 3 megabit link, or 3 megabit port, for example, with prices creeping up instead of down over time. But 100 meg is a great one to look at because a few years ago it was a very expensive port, and we had some very high prices being paid for people who signed their contracts in 2012 or even before that. But the prices have come down very dramatically by 2015, and that's quite interesting because by 2016, the folks who said they had just signed new contracts in 2016, most of them were not taking advantage of 100 megabit per second, MPLS ports anymore. They had shifted their attention to higher bandwidths. They were now looking at the 1 gig ports. And when we look at the 1 gig data, we can see that pricing there is higher, but again trending downward. And here we've shifted perspective here. We're looking at the access ports, although the access port prices there are still higher on average, they've come down dramatically over time as well. And so this is becoming a real sweet spot in the market from the enterprise perspective, in that they want the higher capacities, and getting access at those higher speeds to get the higher MPLS speeds across is getting significantly cheaper over time. So the last space in which we, well, not the last space, I shouldn't say that, another space in which we asked folks to tell us about their providers and their experience with their providers was in providing some ratings on aspects of services such as customer support and the overall technology type features and functionality they were getting, and the value that they're getting. And we'll see the broken out ratings in just a moment, but looking at things overall on a 1 to 10 scale, there's not a huge variation in the market. We saw that overall the vendors were getting about a 6.8 across all categories, across all vendors, and that if we break it out by vendor and look at AT&T and Verizon, AT&T's getting an overall 7, Verizon a 6.6, and everybody else other than them a 6.9. So these are not stellar ratings, but they're by no means terrible. We saw ratings as low as 3 and 4 in the pool. Obviously, some folks out there are very unhappy with their providers, but by and large, we were seeing things in the 6 to 10 range. And if we break it out by technology, value, and customer service, we can see that AT&T was leading in each of those categories, with a significant lead in the technology space, and hitting closer to the overall average and the other carrier scores in value and customer service. Verizon trailing along a little bit behind, but not terribly far, and with the other carriers in the space, not including AT&T and Verizon, coming in very close to the overall average. So our recommendations based on the research, and again, we're extremely happy to engage with you and do a customized rates review based on what you're paying and who you're paying it to, comparing it against the results we've got. If your contract is more than a couple of years old, you should probably be renegotiating and focusing on the MPLS speeds and access speeds that you need for your really next 5 to 10 years of wide area networking. So higher capacities and different characteristics. When you're negotiating contracts, you know, people often are looking at SLA terms that give them some kind of minimal compensation for, you know, significant outages or degradations of service quality. and those are typically not as useful to the enterprise, of course, as having continuous and high-quality services. So get creative in thinking about the SLA terms that you're building into those renegotiations, and looking for, obviously, leniency in exiting the contract for failure to deliver within the terms of the SLA, so making it much easier for you to walk away from the contract, and possibly trying to negotiate for maybe bumps up in service characteristics or capacities based on failure to meet past promises, rather than just looking for some sort of minimal financial compensation. Get creative. And remember that SD-WAN is coming. One of the main reasons that we undertook this research was because so many people were coming to us and A, complaining about their MPLS relationships and costs, and B, wanting to know whether and how to use SD-WAN to reduce them. So keep that in mind, and consider that the role of MPLS shifts in an SD-WAN. It doesn't have to go away. Most of the people that we speak to have no plans to eliminate MPLS, even as they deploy SD-WAN. But it does affect how and where they use MPLS, and may have an influence on what kinds of services they want on their MPLS connections. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind as you're reviewing your rates, or getting help reviewing your rates, as you're thinking about what you're going to be doing next in MPLS. So if you're a client and you want to find out more about this, please contact client services at clientservices@nemertes.com, or call 1-888-241-2685. Non-clients, please contact Nemertes Sales if you want to talk about one of these customized rate reviews. That's sales@nemertes.com, or again, 1-888-241-2685. Before we go to questions and answers, I wanted to invite you all to join us at our next webinar. Erwin Lazar, VP and Service Director in Unified Communications and Collaboration, will be talking about how to incorporate team chat into your collaboration strategy. Team chat applications like Cisco Spark, Microsoft Teams, RingCentral's Glip, or Slack are gaining rapid enterprise adoption, but they're also creating some confusion as IT leaders struggle with how to incorporate chat into their overall collaboration strategies. Do these apps replace email and instant messaging? Are they a new kind of unified communications? Are they best suited for work groups or for enterprise-wide deployment? Join Erwin. He will give you the lowdown on all of it, drawing both on our research in this space and our experience as a company that rolled out Slack and has struggled through some of these same issues. That'll be on March 15th this year, and at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You'll find that you can register via the Nemertes homepage, www.nemertes.com, if you scroll down to the webinars section. And lastly, again, before we go to Q&A, let me just make note of the fact that Nemertes is having our annual conference, Nemertes Navigator 360, this year, June 20th, 21st, and 22nd at the Sandpearl Resort and Spa in Clearwater Beach, Florida. Our subject this year is Making Digital Transformation Real, the journey from technology to business value. And we will be discussing a broad set of technologies and process changes that occur under the rubric of digital transformation. We'll be helping participants both connect with each other and learn from our research in digital transformation, and specifically the digital transformation maturity model that we've developed based on that research. Participants will actually get a scorecard showing how their companies measure up on that maturity model as one of the perks of attendance. If you're interested, please visit Nemertes' website, www.nemertes.com. Go to the Navigator 360 page. And with that, we will throw it open to questions and answers. And Rachel, can you take it away?
Yes. Do you think that the IT culture of your study participants match the norms of most companies?
It was a little different from the footprint we see in most of our research. It was significantly more heavily weighted to the moderate folks. And what we've been seeing steadily for the last 4, 5, 6 years almost is a slight shift towards aggressive companies that see IT as strategic. And so it was unexpected to see half the companies rating themselves as moderate. We expected it to be more in the 35 to 40% range based on trends we've been watching.
Okay, next question. Does turn-up time include circuit installation, provisioning, or just the turn-up of the circuit?
That varied a little bit. Mostly it was folks getting things turned up where there was already infrastructure in place, but not always. And the comments lead us to believe that that didn't always make a big difference. I mean, they knew it was going to be longer if they had to get something brand new installed, but it didn't necessarily map directly to an extra number of weeks. It was inconsistent.
All right. What happened to Sprint? Where did they go?
We did not get enough respondents who identified Sprint as their MPLS provider to include them in any broken out way.
Is there any correlation between connection time and market share? This is, are AT&T, Verizon typically faster overall than the providers in the other categories?
Not notably faster in delivering, better in consistency in delivering. If I recall properly, I would have to go back and do the analysis in more detail.
Let's see. We use both AT&T and Verizon. AT&T seems to be having more unexpected service outages due to upgrading versus Verizon. Is service uptime reflected in your survey?
Not directly. We instructed folks to include that in their technology ratings, where we're looking at features, functionality, and reliability.
All right. And last question, what are the number 1 and 2 carriers able to deliver stable services in India?
We did not ask for ratings of services outside North America, so we do not have direct research data to inform that. Sorry. We hope to expand to other parts of the globe in the 2017 research that we do on this topic.
All right. With that, we will wrap up today's webinar. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. Again, please join us for our next webinar on Tuesday, March 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern, How to Incorporate Team Chat into Your Collaboration Strategy by Erwin Lazar. A registration link will be provided on the website shortly. If you would like to follow up with us and are a client, please send an email to client-services@nemertes.com. If you are not a client, please send an email to research@nemertes or sales@nemertes.com. Thank you very much, and this concludes our webinar.